Hello, everyone. We have a great webinar on tap today. With us is Russ Owen, a Salty Dawg World Class sailor, who will be discussing using the Salty Dawg Comprehensive Offshore Checklist. If you haven't had a chance, we recommend that you read the Offshore Sailing Pre-Passage Checklist. That is what I sent you a link for last night. We have it posted on the Salty Dawg website, and you can find that under the members only section. If you have any questions during the webinar, just go ahead and type them in the chat box that I've opened. Russ will address them at the end of the webinar, but type them in as you think of them. I'm going to ask everyone to keep your video off and to keep muted. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Alex Helfand, our Salty Dawg Education Coordinator.
Thanks, Barb. I'm kind of looking forward to today's presentation by Russ. Russ is one of the original authors of the offshore checklist, which has been contributed to by a number of other world-class sailors as well that are part of the Salty Dawgs. Having just completed a crossing, I have to admit I didn't look at the list beforehand, although I think in some other seminars we had last year, a lot of this had been covered, so I felt we had most of this under our belts. But I think there's a lot of really valuable material that Russ is going to go over, and hopefully we'll all have some good questions towards the end. And with that, I will pass it off to Russ. By the way, with respect to questions, Russ has suggested that please hold your questions to the end. You can put them in the chat when they come up, but we'll address them all at the end. And with that, it's all yours, Russ.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, I'll try to get through the slides I have in about a half hour, so we have plenty of time to answer your questions. So with no further ado, I'll get forward. If I look like an old sea captain, it's because it's true. I'm both old and a captain, but I'm actually an aerospace engineer by training. And my wife and I circumnavigated from 2013 to 2015, and we've done numerous Caribbean 1500s and Salty Dawg rallies over the years. So this is kind of a culmination of a lot of experiences of that type. Hank asked me to pull together a checklist about 2 years ago. There were several on the website that had, like one was a Coast Guard safety checklist, and another was a, one couple's version of a checklist. And quite rightly, he said, we really ought to have one master checklist. So I took the unenviable assignment of pulling it together. I took the three that were on the website and combined them and eliminated the redundancies, and then just kind of did a stream of consciousness from my various experiences and checklists. And then, as Alex said, I circulated it to at least 10 of the other world-class sailors in the Salty Dawg Association, and they added and refined it. And unfortunately, it's an extremely comprehensive list, but it comes from real experience. The intention of it really is as a reminder or thought provoker. It's not really in a way it's a to-do list, but the truth is most experienced captains do all of these things over a period of time, perhaps a year or something like that. And a lot of us have a sort of a mental checklist. If we're down in the engine room checking the oil, we'll look at the motor mounts, we'll look at the belts and the hoses, and check everything that we see while we're down there. And when we're walking the deck or when we're on watch, we're frequently looking at the rig, looking up at the rig. And you just tend to develop habits over time where you do these kinds of checks. But even experienced captains miss things. And it's good to have, I think, a list you can run over, and you might see something on there where you go, oh, I haven't really checked and cycled those through hulls in a year or something, and you'll go down and do that. So, use it as a reminder or a thought provoker. And by all means, if you have additions to the checklist, please send it in to us. We're always gathering ideas, but obviously it's intended as just a sort of a reminder and a service for less experienced captains or even experienced captains to help them maintain their boats. I would consider a time-phased approach in applying the list if you haven't done it before. There are things on the list, such as your rig examination and haul out and hull and things, where you're probably going to want to take some time to get things repaired. Most riggers recommend taking your mast down every 10 years. Those things take time to schedule and get done. And so it's probably a good idea to go through the list and just say, you know what, I want to do all this. These are the things I should do, say, a year before I leave on my voyage. And then these are things I should do 6 months. And then there's stuff that kind of backs up that needs to be fresh and ready by the time you're ready to leave. So think about just time phasing it on your own level of priorities. By all means, employ experts where your personal expertise is lacking. There are many opportunities in the Salty Dawgs where you can get a rigging inspection or something like that. You can hire surveyors, you can hire mechanics, at any point. And I have the sort of philosophy that the more eyes, the better. I mean, even though we took very good care of our catamaran, every time somebody offered a rigging inspection or something, we took them up on it. I mean, the more eyes, the better. And, they will find things that you didn't see. At the end of the day, it's the captain's decision and responsibility to make sure that your vessel is seaworthy and safe for taking people to sea. And really, it's your decision how far you go with this and how deep. But it is a good list, I think, and it's a good collection of things that you really should do over the course of a year or so. Generally, the lists that I started with were organized differently. Some, like the Coast Guard one, was organized around safety, and some of the lists that were on the website from different sailing magazines started like top of the rig to the bottom of the keel or stem to stern. I decided to take a different approach and really organize it by system and capability. And only because that helps me keep my thoughts together, because as I maintain systems on our boat, that's how I think of things. And so generally it's organized starting with the hull, deck, and equipment on the hull and deck, and working through the seaworthiness of the structure itself, and then moves on to standing and running rigging and sails, goes through interior cockpit items and docking gear, and then you get into the detailed systems, engines, generator, fuel and water, steering systems and thrusters, various electrical and electronic systems. And I have a pretty comprehensive list of system checks in there. Windlass winches, furlers, your ground tackle, the various comfort things, refrigeration, AC, propane, and of course waste and various pumps. And then as you're getting ready to go towards the end of the list, navigation, comfort, and provisioning are covered. Spare tools and dinghy items. A lot of people forget about the dinghy until they're ready to go, but that's really your SUV when you're exploring places, and you want to make sure that's good to go. And then finally, safety gear, medical, and crew and passage planning. So it's pretty comprehensive, and we chose to organize it this way. And I think it kind of makes sense from a time phasing as well as looking at holistic systems on the boat. So we'll start with hull and deck. Basically, to start with, you're looking for defects and damage in the systems and the fiberglass or epoxy and Kevlar and the structure of your vessel. And it's pretty much a comprehensive list to make sure your equipment is in working order and well secured. You don't find any, obvious cracking or blistering. I mean, cosmetic things won't stop you from sailing, but they tend to grow with time. But certainly if you discover holes or a through hull that doesn't work or a defect, this is a good time to really take a close look all over your hull. And I highly recommend a haul out to do that, because you really can't look at the bottom of your boat very well underwater, even though it is possible. I would advise to pay special attention to rudder and keel inspections. The picture on the lower left is pretty much what happens to a sailboat when it loses its keel. And the boat will not stay right side up without that weight. And so I think that really you want to pay special attention to the keel. Most keels are attached by large keel bolts, keel bolts, which you can find down in your bilge. And some of them are fiberglassed over, which makes them a little more difficult to inspect. But pay special attention to that, because that's a critical safety item, and the boat doesn't go any further and it rolls over in a hurry if you lose your keel. The rudder is also very important, not only because you need to be able to steer the boat, but you can develop backup systems to steer the boat without a rudder. The biggest issue is it leaves a hole. And sometimes when the rudder's going bad, it has banged a hole in the hull, or the tube that supports the rudder bearing is leaking and is pumping water into your boat. So really, those are mission critical items that you should pay a lot of attention to. Through hulls are another area that I think warrant special attention. You want to be able to close those and cycle them and make sure that you have a scenario prepared for if you have damage or you're taking on water, how you stop that leak. One side note, for those of you who might still have plastic through hulls, I would highly recommend that you replace those with metal ones, preferably stainless steel. A lot of the charter boats have plastic through hulls, and what happens with them is they put them in at the factory and tighten them down, and then over the years sun damages the outer ring, and eventually it might split and pop off, which leaves basically the hole and the hose unsecured through the through hull, and that can pop back into the hull and leave a hole in your boat. So pay special attention to your through hulls when you're inspecting them, and I would recommend, if you have plastic ones, that over time replace them with metal ones. The story around the picture on the right, this is a Danish ship that I believe was rescued earlier this year by the Coast Guard, and they simply had an unsecured anchor on their bowsprit that banged a hole in the front of the hull. And they were taking on water there, and all they could think to do was stuff it full of life jackets and call for help. And it's just one of those simple things on the checklist: that is your anchor properly secured and stowed, and does your anchor locker drain to the sea? Is the drain hole plugged? Things of that nature. It's just really worth checking that stuff out and making sure that's all properly secured. Cracks and blisters in your hull can range from minor to very major, and as I said, a haul out I would highly recommend, preferably with a surveyor handy. You want to inspect your prop zincs, through hulls, and etc. while you're down there. We have a friend who we sailed around the world with from Eastern Europe, Lotto, and he told us a story last year when we had dinner with him, that he had taken a bunch of climbers up to Greenland or Iceland, I believe. No, it was Greenland, to go climb some of the glaciers. I guess that's a new extreme sport. And he said he, got in, sailed carefully around all these icebergs and got up to the big one, and he nosed into it and put pitons in it, and they tied the boat to the iceberg, and his climbers came out, climbed on the iceberg, came back, and he went to leave, popped the boat in reverse, and he heard a zing and it wouldn't move. And he managed to sail out of there between the icebergs and get out into open water. And when he finally dove on the boat, his prop was missing. And he just said, "Darn it, I serviced it and I forgot to put the cotter pin back in the retaining nut." And fortunately, he had a spare, but it's no fun to put a new prop, even a spare prop, on in icy water. So little things can cause big problems. The right-hand picture on this slide is an illustration of a keel that is not only bolted internally, but it's fiberglassed over in the fillet between the hull and the keel. And you can see it's been flexing by the large crack that shows in the hull. So basically, in the hull and deck, our aim is to keep people in the boat and keep the water out of the boat. So it's worth going over that checklist in detail. Standing rigging. A lot of people don't like to go up the mast. They ignore some of this stuff. It's scary, it's true. But as I said, there's plenty of professional riggers that are happy to do that, and it should be done regularly. A very detailed technical inspection really is a must, especially if you're going into blue water where you'll be more than Coast Guard range from shore, which is about 200 miles. Typically, subtle cracks and corrosion can cause life-threatening failures at sea. Your mast takes a lot of load under a lot of pressure from wind and sails, and it's heavy in its own right. And usually failures are catastrophic when they happen. And you just really want to take care of this. Most surveyors and ship or boat builders will recommend you actually take your mast down every 10 years and do a detailed inspection of the inside and out of the mast and all of its connections. And as I said before, seek professional help. You know, the more eyes, the better. It's not a terrible thing to go up the mast. That's me on our mast on the left side there. I typically have a good bosun's chair, and I wear a bicycle helmet, and sometimes I'll wear a life jacket if it's rough, because you get beat up against the mast sometimes when the boat's moving around. But it's actually a nice view from up there, and it's kind of fun to do. But take a magnifying glass and a little wire brush and some rags and things, and just really do a detailed inspection of all the joints and connections and welds and fillets, because they can be catastrophic. The picture on the right-hand side of this slide is from this year's return rally from the Caribbean, where one of the sailors' gooseneck broke. And so, as you can see, they're at sea and the boom has detached from the mast while the sail was up. Again, these are failures that happen over time. You can't prevent all of them, but a good inspection and good maintenance can stave that off. This slide shows you some examples of the kinds of detailed things you want to look for. These are usually not obvious. The corroded and broken wire on the left was covered by tape, and so it wasn't really that visible, but that's a good example of crevice corrosion. And the rod on the right-hand side has crevice corrosion in the middle of it. And these are all failures that happen as these cracks grow over time. You can see the chain plate on the lower left side has a crack progressing through the center of it. And without a detailed inspection and a magnifying glass, you won't see a lot of these things. The turnbuckle on the upper right, you can see there's a hairline crack that runs across the top of that eyelet. That looks like that's about ready to go. But again, if you just casually look at that from the side, you wouldn't have seen that. And of course, the failure on the lower end shackle there is pretty obvious, but that's from a stress crack that grew gradually through the metal on the side. There's a phenomenon called crevice corrosion where we tend to get lulled into a false sense of security by saying, hey, my stuff is all stainless steel. Believe it or not, stainless steel will corrode if it is anoxic and immersed in water, which means if you have rigging tape on your turnbuckles and things like that, and they trap water and no air next to that stainless steel for an extended period of time, it will corrode. It's subtle. It happens over time, but it's something to keep an eye on. And the kinds of failures like you see in that lower left chain plate are caused by that being very, very confined and covered up either with fiberglass or plastic or some other thing. So it's well worth a detailed inspection. And a good rigging inspector will find all of these things. Moving on to running rigging, probably the third most important element on your boat. As the saying goes, chafe happens. Inspect lines carefully, because when they fail, they fail badly, and usually they're under a huge amount of load. I mean, we had a 58-foot catamaran, and we had at times tens of thousands of pounds of load on the lines on our cat, and that's a scary amount of load, even though it's not moving. You know, if something fails, it will catapult parts or people through the boat or off the boat. So inspect all your lines carefully. They should be of adequate size. The cover should be intact, good strength, clean and free of defects with properly whipped ends. It's pretty easy to do. You can run your hand over them. You can look at them, but make sure you look at them end to end. Make sure your blocks and pulleys are sound and run smoothly. And again, these are areas where you can find little cracks and wear on the turnbuckles, on the blocks, and on the block sides and things that, you know, if you see a crack, replace the block. They should all be clean and run smoothly. You want to make sure your winches are secure and serviced. And by secure, I mean, are they coming loose from the deck? Do you see any cracking where they're attached to the deck? And keep them serviced so they operate well and the pawls work, even when they're in salty conditions with waves washing over them. Line locks, those of you that have the clamp down line locks, because you have less winches than you have lines to wrap around, you should take those apart and clear the outer cover of your lines of braids in those clamp locks, and it leaves a whole amount of debris in there. And it's actually pretty easy just to take the cover off and blow them out, but that stuff ends up jamming up the line lock when you use it over time. Of course, carry adequate tools and spares. Pay special attention to furling gear, especially the in-mast and in-boom systems. My personal view is that the in-boom furling is not safe in an offshore situation, only because in an emergency scenario, if it jams up, they're very difficult to get the sail down. And I like to be able to drop the sail in a heartbeat if I have to. But if you have them, you know, they're making them better and better as years go on, and you want to pay special attention to the line that furls that, and the use and observation of how those sails furl up in the boom and the mast. They need to be perpendicular and they need to go in flat, and you don't want it to bind up in there and leave you with a bunch of sail out in a gale. So pay special attention to those. And as I said before, block and line failures can cause serious injury, so take this very seriously. Sails are pretty straightforward. You should run over every square inch of your sails and inspect for wear and sun damage, or have a sail loft do it. They'll come and pick them up and inspect them and bring them back to your boat while you're getting ready to go. Focus on the load areas, tack head, clew, the webbing, attachment points, things of that nature. That's usually where you'll see chafe and wear, and perhaps where sun damage is starting to fray the fabric. Also check for chafe areas against your rigging. There's usually a place where you hit your spreaders or your stays, and they rub against it. And you try to avoid that when you're sailing and trim your sails properly, but frequently there are chafe areas there. And always carry sail repair supplies, sticky tape, sticky back tape, sewing kits, extra fabric, because you may use that at sea. That lower left picture is us on our catamaran after we ran over our Jenniker the second time. We had a top-down furler that failed. Apparently top-down furlers just aren't strong enough for 58-foot catamarans, which we learned over time, but we did run over our sail and put a few holes in it. So that's us just spreading it out in the cockpit. And you can do that a square inch at a time. You don't need to have a driveway, and just run over it and repair it where you see holes. The right-hand picture, that's me standing up on the bow of our cat, looking up at our screecher, which was furled, and it had sun damage on it, which I thought it might make it to the Caribbean, but it didn't. But this is the lesson learned. As we were sailing off of Hatteras and the winds were picking up to 34 knots and we had 18-foot seas, we started to notice little pieces of cloth heading for North Carolina. And looked up there, and the Jenniker, or the screecher, had unfurled at the top like a rose and was blowing in the wind. And it was a hell of a thing to get back into the sail locker and get down. So it is well worth doing a comprehensive sail inspection. And on these kinds of lessons, we learn to do it all the time. We move on to interior and cockpit inspections. You know, there's lots of detail in this section, but in general, you're looking for secure storage and clear access to things, that things, you know, can latch. I tell people, we have another seminar on preparing your boat for offshore passages. And one of the things I tell people in that seminar is, imagine your boat upside down. And that's really the only way to know that you have good secure storage and clear access. You know, will your floorboards come up? Do all the cockpit lockers open? Do your cupboards open? Or your plates loose? You know, think about that kind of stuff. You don't have to go overboard, but if you imagine your boat upside down, it gives you a whole nother perspective on whether your storage and access are clear. I always look for adequate handholds and hard points, because you're going to want to hang on one hand for the boat, as they say. And you're not all the same height too. So take a good look at your handholds and how far your crew members can reach. and make sure you have plenty of those and plenty of places to clip in on your safety harness. I like to recommend people make sure that they have comfortable places to be. Good cockpit cushions, comfortable places to sit down below, good weather protection, bimini, things like that. I think fatigue is probably the biggest safety factor in sailing offshore, because when you get tired and beat up, you make bad decisions. And so try to make sure you have comfortable places to be for you and all of your crew to avoid fatigue. And of course, you want to check your steering pedestal and gear, make sure it's secure and smooth and your cables are maintained. The engine, winch, and gear shift controls are all, good operating condition and not binding. Looking at ladders and gear, adequate weather and UV protection, things like that, all part of that checklist. So this is just making sure you're good to go. I always say most boats have this, but I have seen some offshore boats that don't. You should have basic navigation and instrumentation available in the cockpit. And by this, I mean, a compass and perhaps a wind instrument or a wind vane at the top of the mast. As I talk about, I gave a seminar on outfitting your boat for offshore passages. And as I've said in that seminar, you're only a lightning strike away from sailing in the 17th century. So you should have the equipment and be able to do that if that happens. And finally, you want to have good docking, heaving, and towing lines and fenders on board and be well prepared for either being towed or tying up to someone or coming into port. So enough about interior and cockpit. Engines and generator. I gave a seminar, I think it was earlier this year. No, yeah, it was earlier this year, maybe late last year, on diesel maintenance. There's a complete overview. It's about an hour-long seminar you can download, and talks about maintenance and inspection of diesel engines. And so I recommend you go look at that if you're not familiar with yours. But you should perform a complete maintenance and inspection on all the engines on your boat. The purpose of these checklists, excuse me, some of them are detailed and kind of follow the owner's manuals of your engines and equipment, but take your time and do an in-depth visual inspection, both while the motor's cold and while it's running warm. Use all your senses, look and listen and feel if it's, safe to do so. You'll get used to your engine and the noises that it makes, and you'll know when it's making an odd one. And frequently it will warn you with that before it fails on you. And so, spend some time in your engine room. I know it's hot and terrible and noisy, and, put ear protection on and eye protection and just be there while the engine's running. And just take a good look around. Look at your hoses, look at your belts, look at any signs of leakage. Look at your through hulls while you're back there, your bilge pumps, your muffler pipes, everything. And just take your time. It's not a hard job, but it's something where if you notice something early, it'll save you a lot of trouble. Clearly inspecting hoses and cables, electrical connections, those frequently vibrate loose. Go over your fuel, air, and cooling systems thoroughly, because usually diesels run well unless they don't have fuel or air or water. So that's something you want to really look at. Carry adequate spares and tools as well. And I have a picture on the lower part of this slide of a so-called dripless shaft seal. It's important to check your prop shaft seal. Unlike many of the other through, you can just bang a bung or a plug into in case there's an emergency. You can't do that with your prop unless you want to throw the shaft out into the water. And so inspect this very carefully and make sure that bellows is good. Make sure that it's working well, it's aligned, and have a good inspection. And if you don't really understand how your prop shaft seal works, have a rigger or a mechanic come and look it over for you. We then go on through on the rest of the checklist, all of the other marine systems. On our boat Nexus, we had just about everything. And so I had too much to check. And the bad part of catamarans is you got two of everything to both check and maintain. But, I have in the checklist from our boat, the fuel, water, steering, waste, refrigeration, AC, electrical, all the stuff that I used to check, all the different ways you generate power and you manage it and store it. Ground tackle, bilge pumps, propane systems are all covered, and navigation, communication, and electronics as well. You don't want to forget your fun side and have your dinghy in good shape and well equipped, and have your entertainment possibilities, whatever those may be. And by all means, please fish when you're offshore. So make sure you have good fishing gear. It's not only a survival tool, it's just really fun. And sailboats go at the perfect trolling speed to catch nice mahi-mahi and yellowfin tuna. So by all means, have that ready to go. And then as you get ready to leave the dock, you're getting closer to the time of departure. You're thinking about provisioning and spares and tools you'll have on board, safety gear, medical supplies, making sure they're fresh and up to date. And then finally, preparing your crew, which is probably one of the most important systems on the boat, and planning your passage. So that's kind of how the overall list is organized. So kind of closing this part of the presentation, really a thoughtful and methodical approach, spreading this massive amount of work over a reasonable period of time is the best approach. We had a kind of a methodology on Nexus where Lori and I kind of had an agreement that we could work on the boat from whatever time we got up until noon, and then boat work is over and we're going to go enjoy wherever we are and leave the boat or do something else. And so we pretty much attended to some parts of this list every morning, unless we were off the boat for the day. And it just kind of helps to just be methodical about it and work through it. And then it's never overwhelming. And again, the list serves best as a tickler file or reminder to help you remember to check things. You want to create habits of checking things that become routine as you live longer on your boat and run your boat. You will find that as you start checking these things, you'll think of it more and more often when you're in the different parts of the engine room or the boat or down below, and you'll check these things just automatically. The old adage is true: a minute of prevention is worth an hour of repair. And so it's well worth to check all your systems so that you're not trying to repair them at sea. And doing the preventative maintenance before you leave is really preferable to having your whole vacation be repairing your boat in exotic locations. So I think it's really well worth staying after this stuff. And of course, if you take good care of your boat, she takes good care of you. So with that, I'm happy to take questions on this presentation or anything else. I am not able to see any questions at the moment. Let me.
Russ, I can read them to you if you'd like.
Yeah, there was. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Alex asked, how did your top-down fuller fail?
Furler.
Furler.
I know, and I'm stumbling it over it too. Your furler fail.
We had one of the earliest ProFurl units, and we had agreed with the factory rep to try it on our circumnavigation, and it was the unit you may see. It has a Kevlar luff line, and it has little balls on it all the way up and down, and it's supposed to start reefing or furling the sail from the top to the bottom, but we had an 80-foot mast, and so from top to bottom, when you started trying to furl it, the luff line was not strong enough to start it at the top with all the loads that were at the bottom. And so as we were trying to build preload and pull it in, what it was basically doing is overstressing and twisting the top of the luff line, and the actual line broke both times. And of course, spread balls all over our trampoline, and we had to go quick stop the boat and get the sail out of the water and splice it, figure out what happened, and try it again. And we tried it twice, and we went back to a sock, and the sock worked all the way around the world. But it was basically the torsion on that luff line with the load of a very large sail. It was just overpowering that particular system. I understand there are better ones out now, but I think, honestly, I think those are for 40-foot boats and racing dinghies. They're not for big giant sails on catamarans, but that was just my experience.
We have another question here. What is your view on how many types of spares, shackles, blocks, and so on, that you should have aboard? One of each type or some other combination?
I'm the wrong guy to ask. Our catamaran had a crew cabin in the starboard forward hull, and that was my garage. And I had 23 bins of spare parts lashed down in there on stainless steel racks on the walls. I think that, the obvious answer is as many as you need. At a minimum, one of each type. But I think for blocks and things like that, you want to think about what jury rigging you might have to do. Suppose you lost the top half of your mast, or your dinghy davits broke, or something like that. I find personally snatch blocks and turnbuckles and carabiners even are really helpful for jury rigging. And as we sailed around the world, we had fatigue failure on a part of the bridle that held we had a large dinghy, a 15-foot rib, and the bridle that spanned the back of the dinghy and held it up on the davits, fatigue failed. And so I put a chain of different things together to relash that back up to the davits at sea until we could get back home. I've used snatch blocks all the time to really put a barber hauler on a Jenniker line to get the right sail shape, or to take some load off of a line because I've jammed a winch and you want to use another winch to take load off of it and free it and things like that. So I had 4 or 5 really good snatch blocks on board and a bunch of spares of those things. For everything else, I thought more about my voyage, and again, along the thought of, I don't want to spend my valuable exploration and fun time repairing the boat in exotic locations. It's really difficult to fly Yanmar parts into Tahiti or the Marquesas or places like that. I mean, you can do it, but it takes a week. And so I had enough spares to do full maintenance on everything on board for the whole 2 years we were at sea. And I had at least one set of spares for everything. I'm a little bit anal about that because I'm an aerospace engineer. And so I had 3 autopilots installed, and I had a complete autopilot system in a locker that was in a Faraday box, so it wouldn't be impacted by lightning. And I had a bunch of other things. You don't need to go over the top like that, but typically you don't have enough room to carry all the spares you want to carry. So I would basically look at your voyage and prioritize, okay, I'm going to probably need to do this, and have enough to do that whenever you want to at your convenience for maintenance, and then have one of each thing that you consider to be critical as a spare. It's not critical if you can live without it. So for example, if you lost your chart plotter and you had an iPad with iNavX on it, or you're comfortable with paper charts, then that's not critical and you don't need to bring a spare. But if you're absolutely wedded to it, then you should have a second one somewhere, either installed on board or in a locker. And I used that philosophy as I went through the boat. I hope that answers your question.
Well, we have another question here for you, Russ. What things or what items or what actions or repairs do you feel are crucial to keep a log of?
I keep a log of all of them, just because it gives you a history. And as you can see, I'm old, but my memory isn't what it used to be. And when I was younger, I would say, oh yeah, I changed the oil in March and it was at 500 hours or whatever. And, eventually you forget exactly when you changed the oil and, what condition it was in. So I keep a complete maintenance log on Nexus separate from the ship's log. And I write down everything I do, everything I changed, and, date, time, what I did and what I used in it. And It's helpful for a number of reasons, not only just to remember when you last did it, but it also gives you some diagnostic capabilities around repeat failures. You know, if you've changed your oil several times and you've noticed that there might be a little bit of gray in it or something like that, and it's getting worse over time, those are important things to look at. It's kind of like the ship's log, you know, when you're recording your updates on watch changes and things like that, you're seeing, you know, the barometric pressure rise over time, and it's only because you asked them to record it. And you can see a storm leaving or coming that way. It's similar with maintenance items. So I keep a log of everything. It also tremendously helps you when you go to sell your boat and get your next one, because people love to see a full maintenance log. Any other questions?
Yeah, we got another one here for you. Besides a rigger inspection, do you like the idea of a mechanic and sailmaker inspection if someone is not adept at these?
Absolutely. And in fact, if you're relatively inexperienced, what I would recommend you do is start with a surveyor. Find the recommendation in your local marina, or, you know, from Salty Dawgs, on who they recommend as one of the most thorough and best surveyors. The surveyor will be very relaxed when you tell him that it's not about a sale, because a lot of them get a little nervous being too picky when they're involved in a sale transaction. But if you tell them that this is what Lori and I did, I forgot the guy's name down in the Virgin Islands, but when we bought Nexus, she was used, and we had a catamaran surveying expert in the British Virgin Islands come on board, and we just said, our plan is to completely refit this boat and sail it around the world. So I want you to just do a real detailed, thorough inspection. I think it cost us $800 or $900, including the haul. And he went over the whole boat with a fine-tooth comb with me, so I could see not only what he found, but how he was checking things and what he thought to look at. And he took the boat out with us, and we sailed it around the islands and flew all the sails and worked all the winches and everything. And so I think if you're relatively inexperienced, that's a good place to start. And then the answer really is all of the above. You know, have a lot of times the surveyor will say, well, I can look at your rig, but you really should have a rigger do it. I think that's important. And, you know, if you have Yanmar or Cummins or you know, a brand name motor in your boat, obviously having a mechanic do one series of maintenance and once over on it with you will teach you, and then you'll have the confidence that it's been looked at by a professional. But in my personal view, the more eyes, the better, if it's something you're going to take to sea. Any other questions?
I don't see any right now, Russ. Does anybody else have a question for Russ?
We have time. I'm not in a hurry. Was the list daunting, or was it helpful? I would be interested in those of you who've read it. I'd love to get feedback either now or at some point.
I found the list to be really helpful. I think, as I said, I didn't use it before the crossing, but now that we're back and I have a bit more time, we can kind of, I'm gonna use it as part of our kind of post-crossing checklist to see what broke that I didn't haven't realized yet, and it'll also kind of gauge our whole maintenance program going forward.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, so I think it's, and I also thought, you know, I almost think of it as it's a not, I won't call it a triad, because there's a lot of different aspects. I mean, you had, you know, references to the crew. You know, there's more to preparing the boat than just the boat, and I think that
Absolutely.
that's some really good points there that I think all of us should consider, whether it's a big trip or even a smaller one. So good stuff.
Well, thank you, Alex. And as the previous education director, I would encourage you to gather improvements from all the smart people that'll sail around the world this year and continue to pay it forward because it's the collection of expertise from a lot of people that really wanted to share.
Okay, we had one other. We've had two other kudos for you. So yeah,
Oh.
we're getting some good feedback here.
Good.
So thank you very much again for doing this.
Happy to do it. A lot of people helped me when I was getting ready. So it's, as we've said all the time, it's a pay it forward business. Sailors help sailors.
There's another question that just came up. It's
Okay.
maybe not having to do so much with boat prep, but what is your thinking about circumnavigating in one's 70s? So I think the question is if we're 68 to 70 and we're thinking about a fairly long circumnavigation. What's your thoughts about that?
I would go. I mean, you're your own. You're your own judge of your fitness. And when we went, let's see, everybody on our boat was over 55. I was 56, and so was my wife. And you know, we had a full ship's medical kit because we said we're all old people. And my son's a physician, and so are many of our family members. And so and you can actually collaborate with your general practitioner, or there are some travel doctors that will help you when they know what you're doing. But when you're a captain at sea, you are authorized to dispense medication. And when I went in and out of ports, for example, in foreign places, they would always ask, you know, do you have any drugs on board? And I always just said, yeah, we have a full ship's medical kit. And they just stopped there. It was no big deal. So what we did is we had our physician friends that we could reach on a satellite phone, and if somebody got sick, which happened a couple of times, you know, they would interview them on the satellite phone, and then they would say, "Do you have this on board?" And we'd look, and we go, "Yep, we have that." And the doctor would say, "Give him this, and call me back in a week." And that worked fine for those of us with less than perfect health. And because we were all old, I had a defibrillator on board as well, and oxygen. So you can get a little adventure medical setup from, what's the place up in something navigation up in Connecticut. You can get a good medical kit from them, and you can get it's basically a Pelican case that has a defibrillator and a small oxygen tank in it for old farts that might have heart problems, and take the first aid class, learn how to take care of people. And Lori and I learned how to sew. We learned how to set splints and things like that. Just took some of the basic first aid and a few of the EMT classes before we left. And, you know, you only live once. So I would say if you feel healthy enough, just be prepared and go.
Hey, Russ, this is Hank.
Landfall?
Oop, I think I'm saying, this is Hank, and I think I'm saying the same thing Alex was going to. Landfall navigation.
Right.
Thank you. That's it.
Yeah.
I think I bought everything in their catalog.
There you go. Well, you've kept them in business. Yeah, you have another question here. Would you recommend a survey on a new boat?
Yes, absolutely. Have you ever been to a boat factory? I mean, people are human. They make mistakes. So yes, absolutely. Because the chances are the survey will be very clean, but they might catch something that you didn't see. I also believe that for the most part, many of the insurance companies that are tightening up now require one. So.
See a comment here about, you know, as Alex said, several of them that say the presentation and the checklist are very helpful. One comment says, not so daunting if you use it as a 12-month to-do list.
Yep, exactly.
And then you begin again.
Hank, by the way, was one of the contributors to the list, so he's an editor at large.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And then I see Robin had a comment here. Maybe Barb can double check. He hadn't seen a copy of the checklist. Should have gone out to everyone who was registered for this. And you might check your email or maybe check your junk mail. And if you still don't see it, get back in touch with us, info@saltydogsailing.org, and we can take care of that again. I'm going to back out of here and turn it over to Alex on closing up, but thank you, Russ.
Sure, anytime, Hank.
Yep. Hank, thanks for your other comments. Robin, you should check the invitation that came yesterday. There was a link in it that would take you, I believe that's how I got access to it as well.
Yep.
And Robin, I will send the link out with the recording. I'll get the recording so you can go ahead and watch from the beginning. I know you said you missed a little bit of it, but I'll put that link in that email as well.
Okay, well, Russ, again, thank you very much. It was really a great summary of a very, very detailed list, and I hope everybody takes advantage of it.
Thank you. Thank you guys for putting the seminar on.
And we look forward to seeing everyone at our next seminar next week. Barb, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Well, thanks again, Russ. Great information. And thanks everyone for attending today. And like Alex said, hope to see you next week. Goodbye, everybody.
Okay, bye.